I want to launch us into this video with a well-worn joke, maybe one that your uncle or your dad has been telling you at family gatherings since you were 5. How many so-and-sos does it take to screw in a light bulb? Now, you can put whatever derogatory term in the so-and-so part, but it leads us to the formula I want to get to. How many people does it take to generate how much revenue? Better yet, how many people using how much technology generate how much revenue? So this gets to the core of the type of modeling and research we're doing here within financial services, and most recently within the asset management community. Very, very broad range that gets us to a rare corner of that continuum known as proprietary trading. Now, the fact that I've said proprietary trading out loud will make some people nervous. It's proprietary. It's secretive. You're not supposed to talk about it. But we have a couple of cases where we actually have some publicly traded proprietary trading shops, market makers, leaders in what has been known as high-frequency trading. Those companies are Virtu Financial and KCG. KCG being the merger of Knight Capital and Getco. Now, the fact that I'm actually naming companies in proprietary trading means that we've really broken some eggs now. But this gets us to our case study and something I want to demonstrate, give you some real-life example of what we're looking at here and what's coming out of this research, and not just the theoretical that we've been talking about so far in prior videos. The crux of the merger between Virtu and KCG, in my opinion, had to do with efficiencies. On the Virtu side, we have extreme level of technical leverage in the entire asset management continuum. In fact, throughout all of global financial services. They've been able to generate upwards of $2 and $3 and close to $4 million in net revenue, to keep it simple, per employee. And part of that is because they have such a small team, 150 people, and they were generating $2.8, $2.9 million per head in 2016. Meanwhile, you've got KCG in really the same business, even though there's so much mythology and mysticism and secrecy around what these folks are doing. You don't really know how close their algorithms and their trading systems are. But in the case of KCG, which is really the Getco market making operation in Chicago, as of 2016, they were generating $1.1 million per head along the same metric, the same net revenue. So I believe that the idea for the union between Virtu and KCG, that if Virtu could take KCG, take their intellectual property, apply that intellectual property to their world-class infrastructure, and then optimize the level of human capital and technology, which means throw a bunch of folks out of the boat and get rid of a bunch of technology, that they'd be able to take an operation that was generating only $1.1 million per head, which is significant relative to all the other players in the ecosystem. But in this rare corner, $1.1 million, and try and get that closer to the $2.8 million in productivity that Virtu is getting with their own team. Well, so what happened? Well, in the latest reporting, it turns out now that the combined group, the combined Virtu plus KCG, was able to generate for 2017 $2.5 million per head, which is significant. We're talking about the most technical leverage in the entire global ecosystem. These are very, very profitable firms, given how small their teams are. I also want to point out that the market-making operations of these two companies, the GetGo component and Virtu, were really not that different. Now, you can read what we've said on our blog and postings on LinkedIn or wherever you absorb what we're having to say about these matters, but it turns out that over the 7 years of track record that we can compare these two companies, that they generated about the same amount of net trading income. In the case of Virtu, this was $4.3 billion in net trading income from 2011 to 2017. In the case of the GetGo market-making operation, that number was $4.6 billion, same period. And with estimation of parts of 2017 where we don't have as much transparency as we did because of the acquisition. But based on our modeling, Virtu at $4.3 billion, KCG at $4.6 billion, they were pretty much on similar paths of income over that 7-year period. It just turns out that the GetGo piece had a different relationship with volatility. It turns out that GetGo actually was tuned, and it makes sense given where these companies come from. One starting in New York, the other starting in Chicago, potentially a little bit more sensitivity to curviness with options and sensitivity to volatility. So you have a higher sensitivity in the GetGo market-making operation to volatility, but when you add it up over time, they made about the same amount of money. Now, why we wanted to focus on this is because proprietary trading, market-making, is a rare and secretive corner. Most of these firms, and as we go through proprietary trading and start getting into what I've called a relative value zone, which is primarily where most hedge funds live, then you get into different kinds of strategies, different levels of automation, different skills mix and teams, and so these numbers start to change all the way out till you get to the biggest traditional asset managers, long-only asset managers in the entire world, where you get to the other end of the spectrum from Virtu to BlackRock with $6 trillion of assets under management. Now, the message here is that the combination of human capital and technology capital, those are the two engines of productivity that cause this operational leverage to generate some level of revenue. And the different kinds of businesses today have different levels of inherent automation. It just so happens that market making is almost entirely automated, so they really don't require that many people. However, as you get into different business models and different strategies, the level of inherent automation in those workflows goes down. And that means you have more manual operations, which means you need more people, which means that this leverage component between headcount and technology goes down. We call this phenomenon technical signature. These analytics that we're looking at actually pick up on these crumbs, these signals, that represent this so-called technical signature. And upon observing many of these different patterns, you can pretty much pick out what kind of company it is, what kind of strategy it is, or at least within the zone, based on a reading of these kinds of analytics. It's like a visual language, and it creates a lot of intellectual leverage, something that I've called often navigational intelligence, to help you tune the mix between what you're spending on technology and what you're putting on the human capital side of the ledger. So I wanted to give you this look. I wanted to break a few eggs, and I wanted to point out that because this is such a private and secretive end of the spectrum, and we have these rare examples of reported data, that it's important that we leverage that data and we leverage those patterns to tell the stories about lots of other fascinating and mythological and mysterious names in this ecosystem, like Citadel or D.E. Shaw or jump trading. To find these patterns is really important because it allows us to anchor this continuum and see how these patterns move as we move across the strategy spectrum. And we're going to get into a lot more of this as we talk about the broader aspects of this asset manager technology spending framework. So we've covered a lot of ground in this episode. I want to wrap it there, bookmark it there, and thanks for watching.